without further ado, welcome to the St. Mike's Career Education Center Intro to Law School panel. My name is Laura Neville, and I'm one of the career education coaches in the Career Education Center. And tonight we have 5 wonderful alumni who are back and are back virtually and willing to share their experiences with us about law school. And I think let's just go ahead and get started. So if each of you could briefly introduce yourself, that would be great. Let's start with Piper.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. I'm Piper, and I recognize a lot of these faces in here. I just graduated from St. Mike's in the spring and am now at Vermont Law School for my first semester and everything. And yeah, is there anything else you want me to cover in my little intro? Cool.
Hi, I'm Shane Coughlin. I just graduated in May as well, and I majored in political science and philosophy. I'm from Southern New Hampshire, and I just started at Notre Dame Law School.
Hi everyone, my name is Dina DiBenedetto. I also graduated from St. Mike's in the spring. I was a political science major with a minor in crime and justice. I am currently a 1L at Albany Law School in Albany, New York, and I expect to graduate from there in 3 years.
My name is Dan Davis. I graduated from St. Mike's in 2017. I was an English and a business major. I currently go to UNH School of Law in Concord, New Hampshire, and I am a 3L, so this is my last year of law school. Yeah, I think that's everything.
I'm Richie. I graduated from St. Mike's in 2016, and I actually worked at the college for 2 years while I got kind of another major added. My original degree was in theater, and then I got another major added in political science. I'm currently a 3L at the Georgetown Law Center. So like Dan, I kind of already have one foot out the door, and I'm kind of eager to, get out there.
Thanks. So now we're going to go through that same order, and each of you just spend a few minutes talking about your decision-making process to go to law school, how you made that choice, some of those things you were thinking about, how you even realized law school might be an option for you, whatever feels important to you to talk about in your individual experience. So let's go back to Piper again.
Okay, awesome. So I didn't say what my major minors were. I was a environmental studies major and a political science minor. And I decided I wanted to go to law school because I thought that, and still think that, the way to solve like environmental and social justice issues is from like a top-down like regulation policy kind of viewpoint. And so I only applied to a couple schools. I was really set on like being in Boston. I was like, I'm not gonna, like, I don't even care if I get into Vermont law, like I just want to go in Boston. But everything like changed obviously with like the pandemic and then like financially. And I was so happy I applied to Vermont law and that I got accepted, because it reminds me of St. Mike's in a lot of ways. It's like really small. I know all my professors, like even I'm all virtual for this semester, but even so, I really feel like I know my professors and I know people in town, and like I'm still in a community. So that's really awesome. And I also feel like there is, I'm happy I chose to come here too, because there is not the same sense of competitiveness that I'm sure there is at a lot of other law schools. Like I feel very supported and very like encouraged that, like, even though this has been very hard, like, because law school is hard, but even though it's challenging at times, I still feel like I'm pushed to like get out there and like continue to work hard. And I also like after law school, other than like hopefully passing the bar and like becoming a lawyer, I eventually would like to be a congresswoman or in politics, so that I can like further like environmental well-being and like social justice and like environmental racism and things like that. So yeah, I would say that my piece of advice is to just work as hard as you can, and even when you think you can't do it or this isn't your path, like usually like the right thing turns out and you'll end up where you were supposed to be.
So I went into undergrad knowing that I wanted to go to law school, and through undergrad and I think some of my other experiences, similar to Piper, I realized that through law I'd be able to have this positive impact on the world. And so for me, that's kind of been a natural trajectory. And so going in, to senior year, over the summer, I did a lot of work in terms of just, the application process with studying and taking the LSAT. I think that's a great thing to do, the summer before your senior year in terms of studying. Some people do, in-person courses and other things. I took an online course, used different books, and I highly recommend, if you do want to go straight into law school, that time over the summer is just a good time to just do a lot of things, because your senior year is going to be very busy. And same thing, with writing your personal statements, getting feedback from Laura and, different professors. I did a lot of that over the summer, and I was glad for that. And so when I finally got the LSAT score I needed in November, I was able to, over winter break, put together my application and send that in. And I'd be glad to talk more if anyone has any questions kind of about what that application process looks like. But I think that's a quick overview of what it looks like. In terms of, the decision-making process, after I got my LSAT score, I kind of looked at schools where I thought I had a good chance at getting into. I really researched schools that, I wanted to go into. There are just so many law schools. And so I kind of identified a few. I did a lot of different research about, the different schools so that I could really, persuade these schools that, yes, I want to go here, and they could really see that I did my homework, as I was writing my application and all that. And I really, really liked Notre Dame, and I didn't think I would go, so far away to Indiana. I really thought I would be in Boston, but Professor Griffith, persuaded me to look at Notre Dame, and I did. And I really liked its emphasis on service and collegiality, which I've really seen here. That's something I thought I'd be a little nervous about, people being kind of harsh and just super competitive. But so far, people have been very nice, and that's been great to see. And in terms of like expectations of what I expected, I think so far it's sort of been what I've expected. A lot of reading. Maybe there's more reading than I expected, but that's okay. And it's been a little tough with kind of this coronavirus semester. We are in person for the most part, but we don't have our breaks and things like that. And so it's really been a marathon. And I think that's something everybody is struggling in that sense. That we're probably not going to have as much time to do everything that we would like to do for our coursework and studying, but everybody's in that boat, so that's okay. And in terms of what I want to do, I'm interested in civil litigation on the government side, potentially with the Department of Justice, and so that'll be something that I'm working towards.
So similar to what was already said, I knew prior to attending college that my ultimate goal was to go to law school. I was very involved in high school in my school's mock trial team, and I just became very motivated about the thought of advocating on behalf of others, and in particular the environment. The application process, I'd say start as early as you can. If you think it's something you're considering, I'd say just start getting it ready, because there is a lot of materials. It's a lot. You have to have your studies ready for the LSAT, and you also have things going on senior year. So I, like Shane, would suggest doing that the summer before your senior year. You don't want to spend your whole senior year getting all that ready, and you want to have your applications in early. In terms of the decision-making process, I applied to schools just in the Northeast, but I applied to a bunch of different places. For me, a lot of the decision was made because of COVID. I couldn't visit schools just because of the timing and everything. So I really wasn't comfortable going to cities I'd never been to and schools that I wasn't as passionate about, but there are lots of virtual events, so you can find more about schools than you probably could have in the past. It's pretty accessible. So my decision, I ultimately ended up choosing to go to Albany Law because it's near my home. I'm very familiar with the area. I'm very familiar with the different practices of law that are pretty up and coming here because it is the capital of the state. And I would say that and finances really factored into my decision, having to do with COVID, having to do what was in the area and what type of alumni are in the area, and also financials were a big decision for me. My early experiences and perspectives, I think is pretty much to be expected. It's a high workload. A lot is expected of you. I think it's not unlike what the practice of the profession would be like, though. I think that it really prepares you in that sense. You're expected to come to class and have done the readings and be able to speak to them, and you'll have your professor asking you questions and you have to know how to respond. And I think that that's all really useful in learning the profession. In terms of later experience and goals, I'd say that I'm not 100% set on what area of law I'd like to get into. I think that I want to leave my options open because just from being at law school for a few weeks, I know that there's a lot to do. There's a lot of different things that you can do with your law degree and a lot of different avenues you can take. So I want to keep my options open, but I am very interested in doing something public interest or public policy related. I think I give that to St. Mike's and how much it emphasizes social justice and the need to focus on the needs of others, I think, more than just one-sided. So I think that that's something I'm very passionate about. And I think that that's what I'd suggest for anyone going into it, is to keep an open mind, but try to target what you're passionate about, not necessarily just like where money is at. I think that you need to be enjoying the work that you're doing. Otherwise, there's no real point in it. My last suggestion is just get as much experience as you can. I was lucky enough to try out a few different types of law throughout college, doing different practice areas with different law firms. I would definitely suggest, you don't really know what it's like until you do it. So get that experience, start early. Those are my two suggestions.
For anyone that is at all stressed if they're seniors and haven't yet started the process, I am here to save the day because I did not really start my process until my senior year. I had thought about it for a few years beforehand, so it was in the back of my mind. And I do think that if you know before senior year, definitely start like Shane and Dina did. That's the way to do it. I don't regret my approach. However, I didn't study for the LSAT as much as I wish I could have because I kind of was just, I'm going to do this, and I went for it, and here I am. That said, prepare if you're into it, but if it's something you're deciding right now, it's not too late because the school that I am currently attending, I applied to in March. So it's just the way that things shake out. So some concerns I had going into school, I will just say, like, one of my decision-making process when it came to schools were like, I was Boston or Philadelphia. That's what I was saying the entire time. That's where I wanted to go back to Philadelphia or into Boston. And then when I looked at the schools that I had gotten into, and I looked at the costs, and I looked at the cost of living and the cost of tuition, et cetera, I realized that actually UNH was probably the best fit for me because the rent here is so much lower, financial aid and all that stuff. So there's a lot of decisions, a lot of things and factors to take into consideration when you're making that decision. And obviously financial is going to be one of the biggest ones for most, I think. And that was definitely the biggest for me. The LSATs, that was something, as I kind of mentioned, I didn't really prepare for as much as I wish I had. And even if you are a senior now and are just thinking about this, as I was, don't be afraid to defer. I just will say, like, it's okay, or to not just to defer, sorry, to take a year off, take your time with it. If you really want to get into it, if you're really pushing for those high-end schools, you might have to do that. That was something that I just was like, I'm going, and I didn't do. I don't think I regret not studying for the LSATs as much as I didn't, but I would say if you have the time and you have the passion for law, take the time with the LSATs, and because it is a really large portion of your application process, whether you like that or not. I think it's not a meritocracy in some regards. That's another conversation. But anyways, so law school itself, as the three before me have mentioned, it's a lot of work, and I don't want to burst any bubbles, Piper, Dina, and Shane, but it really doesn't get too much better the rest of the way. This is my last year, and it's finally, and Richie will speak to this more, we're finally like 1 foot out. It is a lot better. The first 2 years are really difficult though, but I think that what Dina said really speaks to it. As a profession of law, is there's always something that's kind of coming down the pipeline. I remember speaking to a classmate of mine my second year. I was like, oh, I just feel like there's never any break. And he's like, well, I think that's the profession that we got ourselves into. So that's something that you have to realize, is that it's a lot of stress management, and you learn that pretty quickly, as I'm sure the one else in this can relate to. But once you can figure that out and manage the time and realize that it's just a lot of work, it's doable. And if you're passionate about it, it's well worth it, in my opinion. I will say I came into law school with probably these expectations of saving the world. I talked to public defenders my first year, and I met with them and networked, and I was like, I'd love to do this. And then my second year of law school, I took a business associations class with a transactional lawyer who does like corporate law stuff. So it's like mergers and acquisitions, corporate governance, securities. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is really, really interesting. And now that's the career path I'm taking, and working for a law firm in a corporate department. So it's been mentioned before, but keep an open mind. Obviously, I mean, there are pros and cons to different types of law, but I mean, like I said, I came in wanting to change the world, and maybe I will in a different sense. I guess that would be, I guess my piece of advice would be definitely to keep an open mind, like it's been said. And if you're really shooting for the stars, take the application process and the LSAT seriously. I mean, I ended up fine. I'm lucky, but I didn't really take it as seriously as I should have. And that's one thing I do occasionally think of. So anyways, I will leave you with that and pass it along to Richie.
Yeah, so I think my process seems a little bit different than the other folks here, which is a good thing, because it shows that there are all different paths to end up at law school. I had zero interest in law school for like all of my life. I was, a theater major, and before that, like since I was 7 years old, I was doing musical theater. I thought that was the world that I was going to live in for the rest of my life. And sometime around my junior, senior year, I had started to get the sense of that I was falling out of love with theater and really starting to become more attached to really more of the advocacy and political organizing that I was doing at St. Mike's. And it didn't really click for me even then that was a sign that I should, maybe look at making a change. I just was kind of like, I'm going to keep rolling with this. I'm going to graduate. I'm going to try my hand, see what happens. But very quickly after I graduated, I realized that I needed to make a change if I wanted to do something that I was really interested in. And I thought about what that was. And the best things that I liked about my time at St. Mike's was looking at large problems and figuring out what people can do at an individual level to fix them. And that's where law school entered for the first time for me. And so because I had just kind of figured that out right after I graduated, I decided I needed to pump the brakes and figure out really, am I certain that this is what I want to be doing? So I really took those 2 years to kind of think about it and to prepare myself for that application process, which I personally think made all the difference for me. And so that's why I think if you are at a place where you're not certain, you're just kind of thinking about it, law school is always going to be there. You absolutely do not have to go straight from graduating into a law school program. My best friend from my first year section is in his mid 40s, and he's the smartest person I've ever met. And I take basically every class with him because I just love talking about the material with him. And it's just the material, like it's just when you're ready, it's still going to be there. So I think when it's your time, you'll know, and you can go through the process. I will echo though, that kind of taking that LSAT prep seriously makes all the difference. It is unfair and it's slowly starting to change, but only ever so slowly, that is the biggest part of your application. And really, when you have a set GPA from undergrad, like I did, it's really the only way to kind of make a change to kind of affect how you look going forward. So I kind of basically like learned the self-discipline that I think I needed for law school by taking that LSAT prep really seriously. So I came away from that and kind of made my list of some serious reaches and some schools that I felt really, really good about that were definitely safe choices. And Georgetown was kind of right in the middle for me. So it worked out, I got in, and then it was about doing the balancing act of, I'm getting some aid from Georgetown and it makes it possible, but is it better to do something with a more hearty financial aid package? And for me, the difference came down to the location. I wanted to be in DC and I wanted the opportunities that DC would provide. And so I have had the opportunity to clerk on the Senate Judiciary Committee. My clinic is litigating in the federal circuit courts right now, and I'm handling a case, with my partner. And those are things that I have really loved and come from being at a school in DC. So I think along with all the other things that you're looking at, what are the opportunities that the city the school is in provides, and how can you take advantage of that while you're actually there during the school year? Especially in bigger cities, a lot of law students come into the city for the summer to kind of take up a lot of the the summer positions. But during the school year, if you're one of the few law schools that are actually in the city, you have a much stronger chance of working with some really cool organizations because you're the only law schools in town. So I think kind of looking at that as well can also be beneficial. So those are the only two different things that I think I would add.
Thanks, Richie. And that's actually a great transition sort of into this last round that we'll go through, talking about practical opportunities and the diversity of areas you can go into for law. I see a lot of students who haven't even considered law school, and you've all mentioned different types of law that you can go into. And I think many people have this one perception of law as being in a courtroom, right? We see it on TV. So maybe in this last round, you could all talk a little bit about what sort of general law classes are like versus some of these other opportunities you're either interested in or have had, and where maybe you think, again, you might go with a law degree. Is it going to be a practicing attorney or some other options that are out there? And maybe describe those for some of the people here.
I am planning on studying environmental law while I am here. I am a joint JD and a master's student. So over this summer, I will be starting, I am looking to get a master's in environmental law and policy. So that, well, definitely I've heard really great things from other 2Ls and people who are older than me. But I am definitely still keeping an open mind because I feel like there's a lot more, there's so many more sectors that I don't even know about yet. And I can really only speak of the first year classes that I'm in so far, but they are all really fascinating. It feels like they've answered a lot of kind of questions and things that I've heard throughout my life. Just law terms that you hear and you're like, I don't really know what that means kind of thing. So that is definitely really eye-opening, and I'm surprised constantly about the things that the classes that I find interesting. I'm in a contracts class right now, and I would never think I would think that's cool, but I'm actually it's one of my favorite classes, if not my favorite that I'm in. So I would say definitely keeping an open mind is good, but it's also nice to know that you have the freedom to make a choice to go down a path that you and find interesting as well. And in terms of, I realized I didn't really touch on like my LSAT experience and stuff, but I took the LSAT in the fall of my senior year, which was like perfectly fine for me, and then did the applied early to schools, and everything kind of just like flowed from there. As like the world entered into a pandemic, it was still nice that I had already applied to schools and stuff. So, but I would say that it's definitely just important to work hard in the courses if you do end up going to law school that you don't think are like you're not interested in them, because like everyone takes the same classes your first year, at least here for sure. But is that I think that there's a lot of valuable lessons and skills that you're learning in each of these courses that are going to help you when you like narrow into like what you really want to do. So yeah.
Jane?
As I mentioned, yeah, I'm interested in work potentially with the Department of Justice. And so like kind of what my summer plans would look like is over the fall or over the winter break that we have, trying to, find a judge I could work with over the summer, do a judicial internship, or do a research assistant position with a professor here. And, there are a lot of different routes to get to the Department of Justice. Some people either clerk for a judge after graduation or work for a law firm and kind of transition into that. And I think, there's just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of kind of your outcomes can kind of depend on like how you do in law school. And that's something that can be like a little nervous, especially in comparison to college, where you'll usually get some sort of feedback, a third of the way or halfway through the semester. And, here in law school, like we're in our classes, like contracts and contracts too, although it's not my favorite. And, we're not going to really get feedback in a sense until the final, and that's your feedback. And so that's something, and just kind of the uncertainty, I think, of that first semester in law school is a lot. And, just have to kind of adapt and work with the kind of, grades that I get. But I still think there's a lot of different opportunities in litigation and civil litigation and all that stuff for me to explore. And I just kind of have to, make the most of that. And, even with the application process, as everybody's talked about, there's a lot of uncertainty too. You need to kind of decide what you think is going to be best given your desires, your financial aid offers. And it's a really hard calculation to make. And I think us three this year all had a really difficult calculation to make with the pandemic on top of everything. But here we are, and we're going to have to kind of work from here. And that's just kind of part of the process.
Yeah, I think I would just echo what was said before me. Obviously, our courses are chosen for us in the first year, but I think that while they are all so different, I think the one common denominator is that you're just learning how to think like a lawyer. And I'd say that in all of my courses, the material is very different, but in all of it, it's just learning how to think and the process you do to build an argument, and it's all about that. So whether you like the content or not, you can get that from it. So I think that that's important. I think also, just echoing what was said again, I think that, yes, the grades are very important. I think that you hear that a lot, like your 1L grades are like a very determining factor, but I think that the stress of that is not worth the effort of thinking about. I think you just have to give your all. You put your all into it. You work as hard as you can, and you hope it works out for you. And that's not being defeated by it. That's, I think, conquering it more than anything. That's all that you can do is do the best that you can. So I think that I wouldn't let the stress of it get to you in that sense. It's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of competition, but you do what you can. Again, just remaining open to anything. I think that we all have had different experiences, and we all have different views about it. And I think that all of those are valid, and all of those are unique to each of us, and no one is right or wrong. Yeah, I think that that's pretty much all I'd say otherwise.
Yeah, first I will echo that sentiment. Just to the 3 1Ls in this current chat, just do your best. It's going to be fine. I will just say that first off. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what a typical law school classroom looks like, and it changes as you get older into your two L's and three L's, you're not as cold called anymore, but there's something that's called a cold call, which I don't know if the three of you have had it yet, but so professors will call on kind of a random student in class, and not every professor will do this, and they will put you through what's called the Socratic method, where they kind of question you on these like meta questions about the case law and what the judges mean and the holding. And it's a daunting thing, but it's kind of weirdly fun to be cold called on and like answer a question, right? I know I'm probably not explaining this great for the undergraduates and potential alumni in this right now, but it's essentially you're getting picked on for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, depending on the case itself. And the professor's kind of just like hounding you on questions about the case that these really smart people wrote, and you're trying to figure out what it means. So that's something that I imagine the three 1Ls in this class or the chat have gone through. So that's kind of a typical 1L law school class. And as you get older, you can kind of feel things out and do things differently, and take some smaller classes where it's not really like that. And it's just learning with the professor, and doing things like Richie's in a clinic right now. I did a clinic as well. And you get credits essentially for advocating on clients' behalf, which is a pretty interesting, really rewarding. And Richie, maybe you could speak to that further, because I did it for a semester in a civil clinic, and it was a good experience, but the pandemic hit. So I don't think mine was as rewarding as it could have been. But there's so many different types of classes you can take. My 2L year, I took a real estate transactions class, a copyright class, and I just wanted to feel things out because I was so kind of hell-bent on being a public defender. And it turns out that taking a BA class, business association, was one of the things that changed my mind into being a transactional attorney. And I'll explain that a little bit too. So a transactional attorney, unless I'm on a defendant or a plaintiff, I won't be in a courtroom. And by a plaintiff or defendant, I mean someone's suing me or I'm suing them personally. So I will be doing, behind the scenes contract writing, mergers and acquisitions, security transactions, corporate governance. So making sure that businesses are complying with the law. And I don't expect to be in a courtroom because I decided after trial advocacy, which is another class you can take, that maybe it wasn't really for me to be in a courtroom and doing motion practice and all that stuff. But I guess I don't know if I'm having much of a point here, but the bigger thing is that you can take a lot of different types of law and you will surprise yourself what you find yourself interested in, is really what it comes down to. Besides those 1L classes where you are kind of pinned to those, 10 to 15, whatever it is, classes, and you're getting cold called by professors and it's intimidating. You really have a chance to explore after that, and you'll be really surprised what you find yourself interested in. So I think I don't know if I answered the questions we were really talking about, but I wanted to speak to that. So I went with it. Go ahead, Richie.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add, and Dan definitely touched on this, is just how important I found practical opportunities to be in kind of figuring out what you like and don't like about the law, because even if you get into a class and you realize this is 100% not what I want to do, that's so useful in its own way, especially if it's an area that you really thought you were going to have an interest in. And so I have tried to do at least one major practical class each semester. 1L, you're kind of locked into your doctrinal classes, which it's kind of hard to romanticize, like reading for hours on end, going into class, getting your cold call, and going through and taking an exam. Like there's a certain amount of like really like interesting discussion that happens there, but there's a kind of a limited amount of ability to really test those skills until you're in the exam prep mode. But the practical courses, you're kind of moving as you go along. And it also just like, it uses a different part of your brain. So it helps to kind of make my semesters feel less daunting. If I ever had another semester of 5 exams after 1L, I think I'd quit it. I'd be done. So I've done classes that are more project focused. So I externed for a semester in the Senate. I did a practicum course with an election law nonprofit working on some of their litigation stuff. And then this year, for the full year, I'm in an appellate litigation clinic, which I'm taking an appeal in a federal circuit from the beginning to hopefully the end. It depends on how much the court drags their feet, which they often do. that has been really helpful for me to kind of realize that for me, what I love about being in the law is writing. That is really what I fell in love with since my 1L legal writing class. It's why I decided to pursue litigation, which when I came into law school, I didn't even really know what litigation meant. People just like said the word and I had no idea what they were talking about. And it wasn't until like a couple weeks in that someone's like, that's just like doing the suing and being the lawyer in the courtroom. That's what you would normally think of it. So that is what I'm pursuing. I have accepted an associate position at a firm for next year. And I don't really know what's coming next after that. A little bit like with undergrad, your first like legal job does not at all have to be like what you're going to do for the rest of your life. So many lawyers kind of make a pivot midway through. So I'm starting at that firm. At the same time, I'm going to be applying for judicial clerkships as a way to really start to, build my writing in a professional sense. And that's kind of a standard thing that a lot of lawyers at firms or outside of firms do as well. So it's kind of an accepted way to take a break from a job and maybe come back to it or maybe not. And it's a way to make that pivot in a formal sense while preserving your professional relationships with previous employers. So it's definitely not once you accept a job, you are on that track for the rest of your life.
Just to continue that, Dan, could we actually jump back to you quickly? Because I know you also accepted a position, just to continue this idea of where do you go after.
Yes, I did miss on this point, and I apologize for that.
No. And congratulations to you as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so I accepted an associate position at a firm doing corporate work, like I had mentioned. I kind of alluded to it, but didn't really say that. So that's what I'll be doing. But I also wanted to go back real quick, if you don't mind, speaking what Richie said about he did various different things throughout law school, and I've done the same. I mentioned the clinic. I was at a city solicitor's office, which is like general counsel for the city. There's courtships you can do. Or clerkships you can do. I was with one this summer and I'm one this fall. And that's a really good way. And I would highly recommend to the 1Ls in this chat and to people that are going into law school to just try your hands in various different things. So my solicitor one was kind of a general counsel role where you're getting so many different types of law. The judicial ones have been really sitting down and crafting an opinion. Then the law firm one I was supposed to have was going to be more kind of all over the place, but that got canceled due to COVID. But I think that there are just, when you're at law school, if you end up making that jump, try your hand in everything you possibly can. My career counselor her best advice to me was try a clerkship, not a real clerkship, but a summer clerkship, try a law firm and try to do like a nonprofit or general counsel. So you can kind of feel out everything. And I would just definitely leave that advice to everyone in this, including the 1Ls, because it's very important. You really figure out what you actually like to do.
So I'm looking at the chat right now and I actually don't see any I do. I just saw a question come up. So we're going to start with that. Well, thank you to all of the panelists for giving us those initial perspectives, but let's start now with the questions. So we have a question. Shane, you mentioned that you are interested in civil litigation. You also said you are thinking about working on a research paper with a judge, either this winter or summer. What type of experiences or internships can you explore while working on an undergraduate degree to prepare for both law school and the workforce afterwards?
All right, first, just to clarify, I talked about two different things. The first was kind of like a research position, actually with a professor. Sorry, I don't think I was clear on that. So that would be, like a professor, especially if you're like interested in their area of scholarship. I think a lot of different schools have, especially like 1Ls over the summer, work with them on their scholarship. And then the second one I mentioned would be working with the judge. So kind of two separate things there. Let's see, as to the second question, something I did, sort of not dodging the question, but something I did that I think was a very good experience was summer research project. And I did that. And so what that entailed, one of the grants from the vice president for academic affairs that they have for St. Mike's students over the summer, right? You can conduct research with a professor for 8 weeks. That was something that I did that I think was good in terms of preparing for law school, because it's one, you're developing, a closer relationship with a faculty member or multiple faculty members, and part of your application process involves letters of recommendation. And so if you're working with, a professor for an extended period of time like that, that's something that is, they're going to be able to reflect that in their letter. And so that is something that I think was really good. And also, you're going to be doing, depending on the major, I was doing a lot of reading and writing. And so I think that was a good skill. In terms of internships, maybe try to do something with like, I don't know, like with a law firm or something like that. You could, potentially do something like that. I think Dina could speak to that as well, actually, probably better than I could. So I'll leave you with that half. Maybe she can add to that.
Yeah, I'd say that I definitely would echo what Shane said, but also it's for me, it seemed a little bit intimidating. Like, okay, you want me to get experience, but how am I going to do that? And so I say any connection that you think you have when you go home for the summer, try to see, oh, can I come into court and watch one day? Can I come watch a case one day? Do you need someone to shadow? Can I come shadow you? Like, just ask. The worst that can happen is they say no. But almost every time I've asked, the answer was yes. So I say take advantage of that. Like, get as much experience seeing it as you can. Doesn't matter if you're interested in it. Doesn't matter if you've never heard of it. I say just go for it and try it. Luckily, I was able to get a little bit of a different experience. I worked with a DA. I worked in a private law firm. I worked with the American Bar Association. So those were so different, and I didn't know which one I wanted to pursue, but it was good to try them all out. Another thing I'd suggest, and I know Peggy Mai is here, so I'm going to do a little shameless plug. If you don't think you have that in your hometown, through St. Mike's, there's what's called the Washington Semester Program, and it might feel a little late for seniors. There's definitely opportunities for seniors still too, but especially if you're, freshman, sophomore, it's something that should be on your mind. If you're thinking of studying abroad, an option is to actually study away in Washington, D.C. at American University, and that was a life-changing experience for me. I think that there is nothing like being in the capital, and there's just so much opportunity there. So if you feel like, oh, I can't get an internship where I am, totally understandable. I don't have the money to go somewhere for the summer, also understandable. This is an opportunity where you can go for a semester and use your funds that you would be using normally for St. Mike's, but you go and stay in Washington, D.C. And there's just so many networking opportunities. Everyone there gets an internship through that program. So I definitely will do a shameless plug for that. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, because I am very, very passionate about that. So.
Thanks. Our next question, how do you want to incorporate community organizing into your law career since, for example, marginalized people are their own best advocates? Do you feel like law school is more effective at changing law than community organizing? So I'll leave this to any one of you that wants to address it.
Richie,
yeah,
I was going to say, Richie, I think that you should take the first question and I will speak on the second one, because I think I have an idea I can talk about that, but you're probably better to speak on the first one.
Great, for sure. So I think, and so this is a topic that often comes up in a lot of law school classes, particularly in your professional responsibility class, which is one of the few courses that is actually required at every ABA accredited law school. And that really focuses on what is the proper role of a lawyer, and how do we advocate for clients in order to make sure that they are presenting their case and they are in control to the greatest extent possible. And that's a very thorny issue that we, as people who are training to be lawyers and lawyers in the field, are constantly having to deal with. And so I think that there are real ways to make a difference in your client's life and give them the ability to take control over their case. But to a certain extent, when the client is the sole focus of the work, as I think it needs to be and is under the ethics rules, sometimes that isn't the best course for, for the big systemic change, because your client might have a very narrow issue that's going to really win their case for them. And your duty is to make that argument and to make sure that if it's the strongest argument that you are presenting it. So it might not be the greatest thing on the whole, but it's the greatest thing for that client in that moment. And that's a difficult balance to draw. So I think there is some tension there with systemic change in lawyering, that there are definitely organizations that try to bring together. So personally, I think my way that I kind of squared that was that I got a real interest in legislative lawyering after working in the Senate, because it really was this broad sweeping policy. I was able to write about what the law should be versus what the law currently is and how it should apply to my client and why my client deserves, relief under the current law. It's really much more of a process of changing. So that kind of skirts around it, because there are necessary balancing that needs to happen when you're using one person's case to try and make systemic change. There can sometimes be tension that ethically and morally, I think, is important to work through to know what's best for this client and whether or not that's the best thing for the system.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I'm actually currently a TA in ProRes right now, Richie. So I understand that it's difficult because the client ultimately drives the bus behind the lawsuit, and you are there to direct them as best you can and kind of be their GPS. And you kind of tell them, you don't tell them actually what they tell you what they want, and you pretty much take them there as best you can. That said, with a law degree, I think that there are certain organizations and places that you can work at that can bring real systematic change, such as the ACLU, which is something a lot of my classmates are really passionate about. And that is something that I would argue might be more effective than community organizing in some sense, because it changes the law in a lot of different ways. The issue with the law is that there's kind of this fight at times between the legislature and the judiciary, and you kind of have to try to move both of them in the right path. And that's, you're not going to change the legislature on your own in the law. You kind of have to move the ball forward on the judiciary side and hope that they then change the law on the legislative side. So that is an issue, but I do think that having a law degree, if you are very passionate about, changing some of these systematic issues, it's a really good thing to have, because you can advance your client's case to a point that you can change the law in a certain area, like Richie said, or B, you can, fight for wider rights in the ACLU, which you ultimately probably would be latching on to one client's case. But one thing, I remember in constitutional law, looking at Brown v. Board, and that was one client's case that this lawyer saw a real opportunity to take this on a much wider scale, because it was about one person, that particular client, but it changed the entire landscape of the United States. So it depends on the case for sure, but I think that having a law degree, if you are really interested in that, there is a lot of opportunity to change the landscape if you so choose. That said, like Richie mentioned, there is that kind of balance where the client drives the case and you kind of have to work with what they really want, because that's your job as a lawyer. I don't know, again, if that's really answering. We're kind of speaking in lawyer speak by not directly answering the question, but I do think that there is value in a law degree if you want to bring about systematic change. If you're looking for that concrete answer, I will say that yes, I do think that there is a real opportunity. Whether or not it's more effective, I think that comes down to opinion personally. So I apologize if I can't directly say yes to that, but I think that there is a real opportunity there.
I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I do want to ask one question that I often get when I see students in my office, and this is actually going back to the very beginning of the process, and it's a reality, and that is finances and the financial, question about law school, that despite all the opportunities it can offer you, it feels very far out of reach for many people, and it's a big financial decision. If any of you are willing to speak about either your financial decisions or the scholarships you were able to look at, and how that played into your decision, or the types of jobs you're looking at or considering. I think that would be helpful.
Do you want to go, Deanna, or okay.
You can go.
Awesome. I'll be quick. I was gonna say that was a huge, if not like one of the most guiding factors, in deciding where, doing the like calculation, as Shane was talking about earlier, about how that was kind of the hardest thing to figure out. Like, just, you have to, what I did is like literally wrote things down on a piece of paper and did like some pros and cons, did like costs, and then like financial aid and scholarships, and like just really like laid it all out and was like, what is the best choice for me to make? And I would say that it's, at least for me, was it is really awesome. I chose a school that did provide me with scholarship, so that is definitely like a big relief off my shoulders, at least in terms of like the overall like bill of student loans that like I will have in the future. But I would say that you just should like look into all your options, and there's usually, it felt like, at least in the process for me, speaking directly with the schools and like working that out with them and seeing if they had any more like nudge room, like here or there. Like some schools were like, no, we can't give you any more money, whereas like other schools were much more like forward about like, oh, like we want to make this work for you because we want you to come here. So I would say definitely just like looking into it and then laying it all out in front of you. Like if you do end up like going that far in the process, I think that's some of my advice.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I vividly remember a conversation between Shane and I virtually sitting with each other and deciding what we were going to do with the cards we were dealt. And it is a tough decision. I think, though, that part of what helps is when you're looking at what schools you want to apply to, I had my list. I had my list of what I was looking for. And I think I always kept that with me. When I was going to events, I asked those questions that I wanted to know. And eventually you get back your financial aid, and sometimes that is a huge factor, and it's just not an option anymore. But sometimes I will say that there's value not in the scholarship you got, but also in what the school has. So sometimes you have to make a decision between going to a school that is more expensive but gives you greater value in the long run, whether that be alumni connections, the reputation, the education, what have you. So I think that sometimes you have to face that the number that you get scholarship wise isn't the end all be all, and sometimes it's an investment and it'll pay it back. For me personally, I'll be honest about it, I was very focused on the scholarship number. The value was important to me. I knew Albany had what I needed. I could have gone to better schools, but for me, I was very worried about that financial aspect. So I can definitely sympathize with that and understand that ultimately that comes down to a personal decision of what you think the value has to be for you. For me, I was concerned, thinking I wanted to do something more public policy, and I wanted to keep my cost as low as possible, so that way it didn't come down to my practice area needed to be to pay back law school. Ultimately, it's whatever practice area I go into now, I think I'll be okay paying back my loans. So I think that it just differs for everyone, and sometimes it's worth it to pay that extra cost because it's going to give you something in the end, and sometimes you choose to go to a school that's gives you a better scholarship because of whatever other personal decisions you have. So I think that everyone, I say, make your list, put your pros and cons, put your values. When you get your financial aid back, don't freak out, but put down what you think your costs are going to be. Like I had a whole Excel with like what my costs were going to be and what it was going to be, and then did the value that the school is going to bring me end up making it worth it. And I think that that's what you have to do, but I say don't let it psych you out from applying, because there are schools that will give you generous offers, and you could always ask the school for more if there's other outside offers for scholarships. So don't let that deter you.
Yeah, to echo a few of those other points, definitely, as Dina said, that you kind of have to, you have to weigh, and part of it too is that uncertainty I was talking about. Is you just don't know how you're going to do in law school and things like that. But it's just something that you have to weigh, and it's really tough. And I remember even, when I got accepted, I was talking to Laura, because, it's still a big sticker price, and you're just nervous, and you need someone to talk to who's very neutral. And so she was a great person to talk to. Just kind of a general overview, right? Scholarships, it's basically almost always based on like your GPA and your LSAT in terms of what each school will offer you. And so just kind of know that. And so generally, the schools that were your reach schools, you're going to get less than your safety schools and things like that. And so that's just kind of something you have to weigh, as well as what you're interested in, how much you can potentially make. And you can, with each school, law schools are very transparent with their data, so you can kind of look at the scholarship you received and objectively determine, like, did I get a good deal here or not? And again, definitely, go through that renegotiation process if possible, if you get, a better offer from a similar school. And you got to factor in cost of living, but you can also live very humbly. And so that's a good way to be frugal now, so you don't need to live like a student later. And I think, it's definitely a big choice, but I think if you're determined and you make a careful decision, I think that you can, set yourself up to do well.
And the only thing I think I would add to what everyone said, I think everyone is right on the money. The only specific program that I'll mention is that a lot of schools also have loan repayment assistance programs, which are called LRAPs usually. And so getting a sense of those before you apply is super important, because it gives you a sense of what your options are after you graduate. A lot of like kind of the national law schools have some of the most robust loan resistance LRAPs. And so it can kind of sway the balance one way or the other. So those programs typically, if you do go into public service, will make a certain amount of your monthly loan payment for you, as long as you are in a public interest field and making below a certain threshold. Oftentimes that threshold is very generous considering. And so that's just another thing to factor in of what are my options coming out, and how does that compare with the debt that I would be taking on?
Great. Well, I think to leave it on a positive note, if there's anything we want everyone to take away from all of this, it's that you all took all these factors into consideration, and they're important factors, and yet you all did end up in law school and are doing well and hopefully headed in some really wonderful directions. I am conscious of time, so I think we are going to wrap it up there. I do see there is one question, but it's specifically for Piper, so I'm going to suggest that we take that off the table offline and have that be a direct connection. If any of the guests want to reach out to any of these alumni directly, please do. They have offered to be resources. We love to make those connections between alumni and students, or alumni and alumni. That's what you're all here for, the St. Mike's community. And I think that's about it for tonight. This recording we'll put up as a resource. And again, please attend the Career Symposium. There will be a government law and policy panel, as well as other panels for different career fields. And I think we may have some upcoming other law-related opportunities, maybe some in conjunction with Vermont law, actually. So we'll keep putting those opportunities out there. So thank you again to everyone for being here. Have a good night.
Thank you.